Good evening and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday the 13th of September and this is Scotland at 7. I'm Andrew Wilson and this evening I'm hosting the programme from Edinburgh. First we will look at today's coronavirus update, then I will introduce this evening's guest, and then together we will discuss the stories behind today's news headlines. As of 2 p.m. today, since the start of the pandemic, a total of 2,982,322 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and the UK Government regional testing centres. Of these, 2,473,440 have been confirmed negative, and 508,882 have tested positive. There are 4,241 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. Due to an IT issue, the figures reported today are likely to be an underestimate of the total tests and cases, so we'll update you again tomorrow. There are no new reported deaths of people who have tested positive in Scotland. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 8,242. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 1,048 were in hospital last night, 90 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 4,142,783 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 3,785,214 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 134,261 patients who had tested positive for COVID have sadly died from their illness, and that's an increase of 61 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just in hospitals. Now then, we are lucky enough to be joined this evening by one of our regular contributors, the unstoppable entrepreneur, parent and campaigner Sam Paton. Sam, it's been a while since you and I last spoke. How are you keeping?
Hello, Andrew. Thank you for that introduction. A bit over-exaggerated, but thank you very much.
Not at all.
Yeah, it has been such a while since we have spoken on the show together. It's a pleasure to be on this tonight with you.
Well, thank you for joining us. It's grand to see you. Our first story this evening is that, addressing the SNP conference today, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said that democracy must prevail when it comes to respecting the will of the people of Scotland as expressed in last May's election. The SNP leader said that her approach to government and to politics will be, as far as possible, cooperation and not confrontation. Ms Sturgeon said, "The experience of the pandemic and the challenges we face as a result reinforces my view that this is the right approach. So it is in that spirit of cooperation that I hope the Scottish and UK governments can reach agreement, as we did in 2014, to allow the democratic wishes of the people of Scotland to be heard and respected. But this much is clear: democracy must and will prevail." She said that the United Kingdom is a voluntary union of nations, and until recently no one seriously challenged the right of the people in Scotland to choose whether or not they wish to become independent. Ms Sturgeon added, "Frankly, it is not up to a Westminster government, which has just 6 MPs in Scotland, to decide our future without the consent of the people who live here. As an independent country, cooperation between Scotland and our friends across the rest of the UK will continue, but it will be on a better basis. Scotland will be an equal partner." So, Sam, the pledges around another referendum were saved till the end of the First Minister's speech today, and during that speech she didn't really shy away from taking assorted pops at Westminster and Boris Johnson, whom she admitted she was not exactly the greatest fan. Do you think there's much chance of cooperation between Holyrood and Westminster?
No, I don't, Andrew, unfortunately. And at the end of the day, I don't think many of us are Boris Johnson's greatest fans up here in Scotland. But no, because unfortunately Westminster as we've seen it day in, day out, believes that they are the custodians of Scotland and Wales and Ireland as well. They believe that we should do as we're told. And the thing is, it's about Nicola Sturgeon's correct. It's, you know, when it comes to democracy, nobody should be able to argue with that. The people of Scotland have a right to vote how they see fit and be able to have another referendum. And it's not about saying we're better than them or they're better than us. It's about an equal union. As at the moment, we're not equal, and it is a voluntary union, as we all know. So yeah, I think it was a very strong message, and hopefully Boris Johnson will listen to it. I very much doubt he will, as he seems to be very stubborn and pig-headed, may I add, and thinks that no one kind of speaks to him and you know, or tells him what to do. And it's not about it. It's about asking for cooperation, and it's about working together. At the end of the day, as we've all seen through COVID in the last year or so, we're completely different cultures. We are heading in different directions of the future, and it would be unwise for any part of the UK to be forced to stay within the union when every part of the UK, whether it's Wales, Ireland, and Scotland, and England, we are all moving in our own direction. We have got different ideas of what our future holds for future generations. And if we keep part of this union, what's going to happen is we risk the fact of actually doing more damage to the union. So my argument would be to those who oppose independence would be, wouldn't it be better to keep the nations of the island on an equal footing and be more of a partnership and working to head as independent nations than the whole thing falling apart to the point that we're destroying people's livelihoods and people's way of lives.
Thanks, Sam. Now, this evening, later on, we'll be talking about some other countries which I think it's fair to say have a different view of what democracy means to what you and I might think democracy means. And we'll be talking about them later in the programme. But do you think that the First Minister's messages today about fundamental democracy will be listened to in Westminster?
I would like to think so, but I don't, because what we see from Westminster is their idea of democracy is even different from our idea of democracy up here in Scotland. And the whole point of democracy is being able to, for the people, the constituents, to be able to vote for who they want and to represent them. And at the moment, that's not happening with Scotland. In Westminster, as we all know, what government is in Westminster is not chosen by Scotland. But I don't think Westminster are going to make it easy for us, and I think they will make it difficult for us, and I think we're going to see quite a lot of mistruths coming out of Westminster over the next few days, possibly next um, coming months.
Well, that's a very good point. I was wondering, we know that Alistair Jack suddenly decided that the benchmark for a referendum in Scotland would to be 60% support, consistent 60% support. I'm not sure where he dreamt that up from. Do you think that the Tory government do you think the cabinet in Westminster really knows what it thinks at the moment? We seem to have very mixed messages from different cabinet ministers.
Yeah, we do, don't we? We see that all the time. You know, they kind of one of the cabinet ministers releases a statement or says something in an interview, and then the following day it's withdrawn. And yeah, I don't think they know whether they're coming or going. But we see it in Scotland. I mean, look at Murray Ross, as I like to call him, or Douglas Ross. Those, but yeah, I've always called them, yeah, that Murray Ross, after Boris Johnson decided to rename him. I mean, you just need to look at him. When he's standing in Holyrood, he's representing the Westminster government. He's not representing his constituents. And he is, and some of the things that he does and says in Holyrood is contrary to what he says and does in Westminster. So it seems to be, I don't think, they've got so many faces, haven't they? You never get a consistency out of them. You never get, them sticking by their word. Or there's so many faces they've got, or as my granny would say, they've got more faces than the town clock. So it's going to be a difficult one. It really is.
And do you think that do you think we're going to begin to see? How do you think the people of Scotland are going to react, and are going to continue to react if we're seeing now it becoming clearer that MPs like Alistair Jack and as you call him Murray Ross are
Yes, I got
are
you to
more
say
interested. That they seem to be more interested in representing Westminster in Scotland rather than representing their constituents in Westminster.
Yeah, they are, aren't they? Which is quite sad. And you wonder what their constituents must feel, and must think of that, which is absolutely shocking because at the end of the day, it's the constituents that voted them in. But what you're seeing now, and we have been seeing for the last year, especially with COVID, is the rhetoric for independence is growing. People who thought before that Scotland couldn't be independent due to not the fact that they don't want independence, they just had this belief that we couldn't afford it and we couldn't cope. And with COVID and how Nicola Sturgeon has handled COVID, regardless whether you like Nicola Sturgeon or not, seeing it from people from outside the political spectrum, people, everyday people who are watching those COVID briefings day in, day out, they've seen a woman standing there reassuring them every step of the way. And she has done her hardest to try and make sure that everyone's had some sort of financial support. I'm sure there's some people that fell through the cracks, but she's tried her hardest. So, regardless of what your personal feelings of Nicola Sturgeon, when you look at people or speak to people outside the political spectrum who maybe don't really get involved in politics and don't really take an interest and say politics is not for me, you are actually seeing these people actually saying, yeah, we want an independent Scotland. Them in Westminster are hopeless. Boris Johnson is absolutely hopeless. They are being the perfect campaigners for independence all the way through the last year and a half. And, and I think Westminster is actually done us a favour at this moment in time. And go back to your question 2 questions ago about Alistair Jack and the 60%. They are just so scared of Scotland getting independence. They are so scared of the momentum which is growing in Scotland, and the fact that so many people who weren't interested in politics before are now took an interest and stood, and they're actually listening to what the politicians are saying. And hence why they pluck these figures out of the air. We must be polling 60% before we can even consider it. I mean, at the end of the day, up here, we know them. We need to take the majority of Scotland with us. We need to have a large majority in order to make it happen. And that's what's happening. The majority for independence is growing all the time. And we need to keep that momentum up. And by doing that, it's by being positive and showing Westminster for what they are. There's just no consistency. They're constantly mistruths. They pluck figures from the air. They say things that with no backup. And, they are our biggest campaigners at this moment in time.
Thanks, Sam. We'll move on to our next story now. Health Secretary Humza Yousaf has said the decision on whether to go ahead with COVID vaccinations for 12 to 15-year-olds will be made soon, as he thanked the Chief Medical Officer Dr Gregor Smith and the other 3 UK Chief Medical Officers for their advice recommending that the vaccinations should be offered to 12 to 15-year-olds. The Health Secretary said, On the 3rd of September, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, the JCVI, advised that whilst there were individual health benefits to vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds, these were too marginal to recommend universal vaccination of this age group. However, the committee suggested governments might want to seek further input from chief medical officers on the wider public health impact vaccination could have. Myself and the 3 other health ministers therefore commissioned the UK chief medical officers to look into this, and after consideration with clinical and public health leaders from all 4 nations, they have agreed the additional likely benefits of reducing educational disruption, in addition to the benefits identified by the JCVI, provide sufficient extra advantage to justify the offer of vaccinations to this group. Health ministers are now considering this advice, and we will make a decision as soon as possible. In the meantime, I want to thank Dr. Gregor Smith and the other 3 UK Chief Medical Officers for their time and careful consideration of this issue. So, Sam, I know that young Christopher's not yet 12. However, from a parent's perspective, how do you respond to this news about vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds?
Well, first of all, as a parent watching this today, wasn't it great to see all the chief medical officers from the 4 nations, um, giving the statement and briefing? This is what we should have been having all the way through the COVID response, to show a bit of unity and give reassurance as well. So, first of all, it was quite nice and reassuring to hear them all. Unfortunately, I never watched the whole thing, as many parents probably dealing with dinners and hungry children and so forth. But as a parent, yeah, I certainly welcome this, and it's good that they are now considering that the younger ones can get the vaccination, and it'll be up to the parents to decide, and it's up to them to make the decisions. And hopefully, there will be lots of advice on hand, medical advice for those who are unsure whether it's suitable for their children. So yeah, I think it's the right way forward, and hopefully it works out okay in the end, and we don't have many more school closures or kids getting sent from home from school and missing out on their education.
Well, that's a good point that you make, Sam. There was in the statement today, it was suggested that one of the additional likely benefits of the vaccinating this age group was to reduce educational disruption of the type that you're describing. I know certainly that since the schools have gone back, there are classes and year groups and schools which are having to close as groups are testing positive and are being required to self-isolate. At the same time, during the week, there's been discussion that implementing a vaccination program through schools would be disruptive of the school day. So, which disruption do you think is better, or what side of the disruption argument do you think is stronger? Stopping the disruption for of self isolating, or avoiding the disruption of having classes go and get vaccinated during the day?
Well, the thing is, Andrew, they already vaccinate in schools during the school day anyway. When it comes to the flu jag, that happens during school time, during classes. The BCG, that happens during school time and during classes. So I think that argument's quite weak. And there's other. I mean, if I remember getting various vaccinations during school time, during class time. Um, Sometimes it was a bittersweet moment of the day because you were getting to escape a class and getting to skive, but on the other hand, you were coming away with a sore arm. So I think, they already do vaccination programs in schools during the school day. So I think having, a wee bit of disruption during class time certainly outweighs, the disruption, and especially the year groups from 12 to 15-year-olds, they're starting to get preparing for their exams and things like that, and they're studying. So I think that's more important. At this moment, I know I normally say, kids shouldn't worry about their exams and it's not the be all and end all, but it's very important and it's very stressful. So I think, taking some time out of class to go and get a vaccination is not much of a sacrifice compared to if these kids get ill and they need to self isolate, or worse, they end up with long COVID. So I know which one I would choose.
Absolutely, Sam. Thank you. We'll move on to our next story now, and that is that opening the final day of the SNP conference, the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, Housing and Local Government, Shona Robeson, told delegates that Scotland cannot have a socially just recovery from COVID without the full powers of independence. Ms Robeson pointed out that for those who ask that the SNP must mitigate every cut that the Tories make, the Scottish Government needs to have the powers to do so. Ms Robeson said, "To bring about a socially just Scotland, we need independence, and we need the SNP. The Conservatives in Westminster and Holyrood don't want to make our country a greener, better, fairer place for us to live and work. The SNP do. Labour will wring their hands, but don't want us to have the powers to make the changes we want to see. Despite their manifesto in May saying they wanted the Parliament to have powers over employment, in June they refused to join us in sending a letter to the UK government to urge them to do just that." She called for the Scottish Parliament to have the powers to tackle the drivers of child poverty and to be able to raise the minimum wage to the real living wage and stop insecure employment. She said that the Parliament should have the full powers over social security to tackle inequality and treat people with respect and dignity, and to have the normal borrowing powers of any other independent country. Ms Robeson added that this is why Scotland needs independence. She said people will look at what we can do with the powers of a normal independent nation and realise that is how we can create a fairer, more equal, stronger Scotland. So, Sam, the Cabinet Secretary gave a few examples of the work that's being carried out. She spoke about the £520 annual bridging payments, which will provide support to around 150,000 children and school-age youngsters. She spoke about establishing a minimum income guarantee, and she spoke about introducing a new £50 winter heating payment specifically for low-income households currently eligible for the current cold weather payment scheme. So what's your reaction to Shona Robeson's speech today generally, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I was reading her speech, and it was she has got a point. Here in Scotland, everything we do is one arm tied behind our back, and when you see what has been achieved so far with one arm tied behind our back, is just absolutely amazing. And when you think if we had full fiscal powers, what we could achieve, wow. It's just yeah, because I'd seen also as well a 110,000 homes going to be
Mm-hmm.
recreated, um,
Mm-hmm.
affordable homes. This is all the things that we can do within our limitations at the moment. Whereas if we never had those limitations, what we could do, we could pull people out of full poverty, we could pull people out of actual poverty, all the children that are in poverty right now, our education with our kids, we could pump more money into that. Um, yeah, the possibilities are endless. And also, as well, to create proper and sustainable jobs, which is what we're needing and crying out for. When the other day I had a conversation with somebody saying, "Oh, but there's plenty of jobs out there, just people don't want to do them." But why would people want to go and do a job that is not secure, 0 hour contract, and is really poor wages, and with where you're not really getting any benefits? Then today that just leads on to mental health. It leads on to the welfare budget going up because people end up sick, because they don't feel valued. And it's all about creating a sustainable and socially just welfare. And that is about looking after the workers and making them feel valued and making every citizen in the country feel valued. So, yeah, I commend Shona Robson, and hopefully, yes, we can
Yep.
turn round and convince Westminster. Well, saying that, we don't need to convince Westminster. We just need to do what we need to do and get another referendum and get independence.
Absolutely, Sam. Thank you. Our next story this evening is that the trade barriers that made the import of Marks and Spencer's Percy Pigs sweets one of the first casualties of Brexit has added an extra £600 million in costs to British importers since January it has emerged. Customs duties paid by UK businesses shot up from £1.6 billion in the first half last year to a record £2.2 billion in the same period this year, according to analysis of HMRC data. The cost comes as businesses face Brexit bureaucracy, higher costs, and an increased number of checks, including complex rules of origin regulations that were put in place due to Brexit on the 1st of January. Commenting, the SNP's Europe spokesperson Dr. Philippa Whitford MP said, "At a time when many businesses are already struggling due to the pandemic, the Tory government's extreme Brexit deal has piled on further hardship and economic damage. Brexit bureaucracy, checks and higher costs are burdening businesses across Scotland and the UK. The Tory government should be bringing forward meaningful support and compensation, not handing them a £600 million Brexit bill." And so, Sam, probably the most important question I'll ask you this evening on Scotland at 7 is, are you a fan of Percy Pigs?
Actually, no, I am not. I absolutely hate them. But never mind. But yeah,
That's okay.
I did actually see the story. I'm sorry, but I only like chocolate and donuts and cake. That's it.
That's okay. That's okay. But thinking about this story thinking about the story in a little bit more depth, Sam, are there any surprises for you in this news of this latest Brexit bonus?
No, there's not. One of the things that I was reading up on was there was a document written, a paper written by the University of Sussex, the UK Trade Policy Observatory, and they've been talking about the increase in trade costs and the impact of Brexit. And this was before the deadline in January, the 31st of December. And one of the things that they said, with all this going to happen, and I'm just going to take a small snippet, one sentence, which I found said a lot. It says, changes to consumption which will reduce resident welfare. Now, what they're talking about is the increase in trade costs, the reduced trade between countries, and the rising costs of basic supplies to the UK, and also as well as being able to supply to the EU. And what actually happens is it is going to reduce the resident welfare, which is us, is how it affects us. And what that means is our standard of living has fallen and will continue to fall with Brexit. And yes, the UK government should take some responsibility and should compensate businesses, but they're not going to do that because this is what they wanted. And at the end of the day, it is going to be the people on the ground, us, the normal everyday people, who are going to suffer. And one of the things that people don't really talk about, and I imagine in the lead up to Christmas, it may hit the headlines, is the cost of postage to the EU and other countries where the UK has not done a trade deal with yet has risen. So all these people who are going to be sending parcels abroad, all the people that are going to be sending Christmas cards abroad, they are going to notice a difference this year in the postage. And that is one of the realities of Brexit. And that's one of the realities of Westminster not organising trade deals with the EU and other countries around the world.
Thanks, Sam. We'll move on to our next story now, and that is that North Korea carried out successful tests of a new long-range cruise missile over the weekend, state media said on Monday, seen by analysts as possibly the country's first such weapon with a nuclear capability. The missiles are a strategic weapon of great significance and flew 1,500 kilometres before hitting their targets and falling into the country's territorial waters during the tests on Saturday and Sunday, KCNA said. The latest test highlighted steady progress in Pyongyang's weapons program amid a gridlock over talks aimed at dismantling the North's nuclear and ballistic missile programs in return for US sanctions relief. The talks have stalled since 2019. North Korea's cruise missiles usually generate less interest than ballistic missiles because they are not explicitly banned under the UN Nations Security Council resolutions. This would be the first cruise missile in North Korea to be explicitly designated a strategic role, said Ankit Panda, a senior fellow at the US-based Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. This is a common euphemism for nuclear-capable systems. It is unclear whether North Korea has mastered the technology needed to build warheads small enough to be carried on a cruise missile, but leader Kim Jong-un said earlier this year that developing smaller bombs is a top goal. Now, Sam, this is the first of a couple of stories dominated by military activity this evening. So rather than focusing on the military, I'll turn it on its head a little bit. How do you think that families in South Korea, Japan, and other neighbouring nations are feeling this evening after Saturday and Sunday's missile tests?
I just know how I feel every time I hear the word North Korea and missile in the same sentence. Absolutely terrified. Absolutely terrified. So goodness knows how these people, the normal everyday people, families living round about this within the vicinity of North Korea must be feeling. It's just absolutely horrendous and terrifying. The man is a fruitcake.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam. And the second story with a similar theme, and you can hear there are military helicopters flying over the house here at the moment. It's a bit of a theme. Russian President Vladimir Putin today oversaw vast joint military exercises with Belarus ahead of his country's parliamentary elections later this week, as NATO member Poland voiced concern over the drills. The sprawling Zapad 2021 live-fire exercises will run until Thursday at numerous sites in Russia and the ex-Soviet Belarus, some of which are close to NATO's borders. They have caused alarm in neighbouring countries such as the Ukraine, and it's not by mistake that this series of exercises, which happen every year, are called Zapad. Zapad is Russian for West. Today's exercises focused on launching a counter-offensive against enemy forces, the Russian Defence Ministry said. In the Arctic, meanwhile, Russia's Northern Fleet and Air Force practiced repelling an attack near its border with Norway. Putin has said that the drills, which the Defence Ministry says involved 200,000 personnel, as well as 80 planes and helicopters, and nearly 300 tanks, are not directed against any foreign country, and has called them a necessary response to increased NATO activity near Russia's borders and those of its allies. The Russian leader flew into Russia's Nizhny Novgorod region east of Moscow with the Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu, a close political ally, to review manoeuvres taking place there. Russia is due to hold parliamentary elections on September the 17th, 18th and 19th, and the ruling United Russia Party that backs Putin is expected to secure a win despite a slump in its popularity. NATO, which has accused Russia of underreporting troop movements in the past, said it would watch the drills closely. NATO officials also warned that the drills increase the risk of an accident or miscalculation that could touch off a crisis. So, Sam, this is the second military story this evening. As I say, we were talking a moment ago about the president of North Korea waving his missiles around. What do you think about Vladimir Putin apparently showing us the size of his military prowess this week?
One fruitcake to another fruitcake. What is it with boys and their toys? Mine's is bigger than yours. That's what it's like with their military weapons, isn't it? It's just absolutely, it's just mad. It's just craziness. And the thing is, what happens if there is something that happens by accident? What is NATO going to do? You know, Are they going to step in and do something? Are they going to turn a blind eye? It's just there's no need for these military exercises. We see it in the west coast of Scotland as well. There is no need. Honestly, it's there's the mind boggles. I'm just dumbfounded that these men seem to think, that they need to show off their toys. It's like an ego trip, and and also as well, it's like kind of enticing and quite as if to teasing the who they view as the enemy. To go, and it's childish. So yeah, uh, uh, let's hope nothing happens and there's no accidents and misfires and so forth. And let's
Of
hope
course.
that they don't manage to wind each other up and it passes these military exercise pass on peacefully, and the men can
Of
go
course.
back to putting their toys in a box for another wee while.
That's a good point, Sam. These Zapad exercises, as I say, are a regular annual event. But do you think that there's anything in the timing this year, either so soon after NATO forces withdrew from Afghanistan on Russia's borders, or with the Russian elections, parliamentary elections happening later this week?
Of course it is. It's Putin again trying to. He's doing what him and North Korea are doing. Look at look at me. Look at the size of my toys. My toys are bigger than your toys. And that's what he's doing. He's trying to show off. And that's exactly what it is. And he's trying to kind of entice NATO and his so-called enemies, who he views as his enemies, to kind of take a shot, isn't it? It's childish. It's a wee bit of kind of psychological warfare, isn't it? Really.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam. Our next story is a little bit closer to home, and that's that Scotland will host the 16th Conference of Youth, the UN's official youth event for COP26. The Conference of Youth is an essential part of the COP calendar, helping to prepare young people for their participation in COP. It gives young people a voice in the climate negotiations, while providing delegates from over 140 countries the chance to meet, share experiences, and build skills. The conference will result in the Statement of Youth, which is presented on behalf of the young people at every COP conference, setting out their hopes and expectations for the climate negotiations. 5 young people from Scotland will be selected to represent the country as delegates and contribute to the statement. The event, which runs from the 28th to the 31st of October in Glasgow, will be funded by the Scottish Government and delivered by Youngo, the youth constituency of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Speaking today, the First Minister said, "Young people have been amongst the strongest voices calling for urgent global action to address climate change. They have been an inspiration, and I am proud that we are playing a role in giving them a platform at the heart of COP26 in Glasgow." So, Sam, do you think it's a good thing that the Scottish Government is covering the £300,000 cost of this event when Westminster refused to stump up the cash?
I was just going to say that. Wasn't that absolutely appalling? The Westminster refusing to pay for it. And now, traditionally, the host nation or the host country would pay for this. So for them to turn round and have the brass neck to turn round and say, no, we're not paying for it, is absolutely shocking. Especially when they're trying to showcase and be the all wonderful, for COP26, and try to ban Nicola Sturgeon from COP26. So I think it's wonderful that the Scottish Government have stepped in to pay for it and gives the young people a voice, because at the end of the day, it is about them, it's about the future, and they have a right to have a voice, and they have a right to have a say on what we do, not a bunch of oldies, or I'm going to use the word. My Christopher keeps calling me this, and by the way, I'm not that old, but he claims that I am. He keeps calling me a boomer. So, the young ones need to be able to have a voice without us boomers turning around and thinking we know everything. We don't know everything. Just because we're a bit older doesn't mean to say we're older and wiser. So yeah, we need the young ones to have their voice, have their say, have their fresh set of eyes, and about how we move forward. So yeah, it's fantastic.
And do you think that, thinking of young Christopher and others, do you think that young folks in Scotland will engage with this conference?
Oh, definitely. I mean, if you speak to any youngster of school age, they are very aware of the environment. They're very aware of the climate crisis. They're very aware of what's going on, and they have very strong opinions. Um, and that's thanks to our education system, where it makes sure the kids get involved and the kids have a say. So yeah, I think I don't know, can't speak for any other nation, but I think here in Scotland, our youngsters will definitely be engaging, and the schools will probably, I would imagine, get involved as well and encourage the kids to engage and watch and listen and have their opinions on COP26, the youth conference and the actual COP26.
Thanks, Sam. And finally, on this story, after almost 2 years of almost no travel at all, what do you think the impact will be of bringing delegates from 140 countries to Scotland to meet with our own young people?
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? We've had practically no travel. And one of the wonderful things about having very little travel is how clear the air is, how clear the skies are, and how there's less pollution around. So it's very ironic we're hosting COP26 and we need to transport all these people in. So the pollution is going to rise in Scotland and especially around the Glasgow area. And I would have liked to have seen that if they were, for transporting the delegates into Glasgow, that they were coming up with more sustainable transport methods. But unfortunately, whether they can or can't, or, in practice is another thing, that the pollution in Glasgow is going to be horrendous. And for anybody living in the flight path at Glasgow Airport, I imagine it's going to be quite busy as well. Whether it's planes, helicopters, or whatever other mode of transport. I doubt it'll be a bicycle somehow. But however, I think it's going to be, yeah, the pollution. I imagine the pollution is going to rise in Glasgow during COP26.
Actually, that's an interesting point. Well, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson is notorious for his love of going a bike. Do you think we're expecting to see him cycling around Glasgow during the conference?
Oh, wouldn't that be hilarious? Oh, that would be good. Yeah. No, yeah,
We'll
I'm
we'll
just
see we'll
thinking.
see what happens.
No, 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 I'm not even going to repeat on air what I'm thinking in my head. So maybe it wouldn't be a good idea for Boris Johnson to cycle around Glasgow. No.
Maybe not. Maybe not. We've got another story this evening relating to the COP26 conference later in 50 days' time, less than 50 days' time. And that is that a week-long programme of events and initiatives launches across Scotland today to engage businesses, organisations and communities in Scotland's response to the global climate emergency ahead of COP26. Scotland's Climate Week 2021 will turn the spotlight on the November summit by highlighting Scotland's national and international actions on climate change, while building awareness, generating conversations, and encouraging commitment to further climate action. Climate Week will include the launch of a series of climate festival events, part of a new engagement programme designed to empower local communities in the climate debate and ensure an inclusive approach which leaves no one behind. Businesses, organisations and individual groups are being encouraged to take to social media to make a pledge they will commit to during COP26 to tackle climate change. Now, Sam, firstly, as an environmental campaigner of some note, will you be making the pledge for Scotland's Climate Week?
Yeah, well, I'm always doing things. I'm always doing my wee bit. I'm always recycling and walking when I can. I've got solar lighting. So I'm always doing my wee bit. So yeah, I will be talking to Christopher and we will be discussing how we can make that go further. But it would be good to see businesses in particular, when they make the pledge, that it's a long term thing, not a short term thing, and not something that they'll just do just for a bit of PR. It's something that they could incorporate into their business long term, and that's what I would like to see more than anything, especially big businesses. Whether it's, encouraging their workers to cycle to work, where it's possible, and I know these things are already going on, with Scottish Parliament. But yeah, I think I would, yeah, definitely would like to see businesses, especially big businesses, making pledges long term rather than just for a bit of PR.
Absolutely, Sam. Now, one interesting thing, just building on what we were discussing earlier, one of the purposes of Scotland's Climate Week 2021 is to generate conversations. And you were talking earlier about how young people are very clear about their perspective on the climate emergency and how that may or may not be reflected amongst, as Christopher puts it to you, the boomer part of
The
our
boomers.
society, our community. How important do you think it is to trigger and generate and support conversations between people, between age groups, between interest groups, in order to progress all of the action that we need to take in Scotland in light of the climate emergency?
Yeah, I mean, conversation's always important for any subject at all, and it's always key. It's sometimes, when people are campaigning, for a subject, whether it's climate change or politics, or they get into the debate, they get into the you know the kind of the bullet points and things, rather than having a conversation. Conversations are a bit more subtle, and people listen and take in more information that way. One of my clients is a lovely woman of 84, and the recycling and the things that she does is just absolutely amazing. And she is even she's teaching me so much on recycling, and it's something that, even as somebody of that generation, that's how she was brought up, was to recycle and reuse everything possible. And somewhere along the line, generations have lost that. So it's bringing that back again. And it's about just staying away from this throwaway society we've became, so accustomed to and used to. And kids are fantastic when they're at school. They're not allowed one-time plastics. Everything's reusable. Just simple things, likes of a reusable cup, using glass or instead of plastic, and there's so many ways of doing things. And one of the ones with the wee lady that I work with is old bits of material and cloth. They become cleaning cloths, floor cloths, and things. Now I remember my gran doing these things, and it's something you get out of the habit of, and you go to the shop and buy cloths. But you could easily just cut up t-shirts and towels and things and use them as cleaning cloths. And things like that just keeps down the wastage going to landfill. So yeah, definitely, I
Absolutely right,
encourage
Sam. No,
everybody to have a
but
conversation
there's
about it.
lots of lessons to be learned across generations. That's absolutely true. And our final story this evening is that stocks of personal protective equipment are to be donated to Africa to aid their response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The PPE equipment, worth £11.2 million, will be distributed by Kids Operating Room, KidsOR, a Scottish-based global health charity. This distribution will be supported by £250,000 from the Scottish Government, which will fund the transport of 25 shipping containers of the material to Malawi, Rwanda and Zambia. KidsOR raised a further £1 million to support the transport of the PPE from the Wood Foundation, Pula Limited, the Postcode Trust and Delta Philanthropies. The supplies include masks, goggles and visors, and the shipment, made available through the NHS Scotland Global Citizenship Programme, is due to arrive in partner countries in late September. The International Development Minister Jenny Gilruth said, "COVID-19 knows no borders. I'm pleased that the Scottish Government has been able to support this assistance to Malawi, Rwanda and Zambia, particularly as they look to plan for an expected fourth wave of COVID-19 in the coming months." Now, Sam, a moment ago we were talking about young people coming to Scotland as part of COP26. Now, in this story, we're talking about Scotland participating and contributing to the pandemic response in 3 countries in Africa. Do you think that taken together, those two stories show that Scotland and Scottish people have an appetite to play our full part in the world as an independent country would?
Yeah, we certainly have. And also, as well, it shows, we already have a platform in the international world, and, you know, to show that helping our neighbours around the world is basically what Scotland does well. And it's a good news story, and it's lovely to know that we are doing these things. And no doubt we will carry on doing these things. And as an independent Scotland, we would be able to do more of these lovely things for our international neighbours.
Absolutely, Sam. And do you think, whilst this is an initiative to be supported, and it's obviously being supported financially by a number of organisations, including the Scottish Government, what else do you think we should be doing?
Oh, crikey! Now, there's a question, Andrew. Oh, I don't know. There's loads of things we could be doing. I mean, the thing is, we could, as an independent Scotland, we could be acting as mediators. We could, there's so many more things we could do. The list is endless. Oh, crikey! Where do I start
I,
and
I,
where do I end?
I, I was meaning specifically in terms of an international response to the COVID crisis. I wasn't meaning more generally than that.
All right, that. All right. And there's me setting our expectations even higher. No, we could. At the end of the day, there's so much things we can be doing. We could be offering scientific um, assistance as well for the vaccines. There's so many different things. We've got so many wonderfully qualified medical professionals that I'm sure would be quite happy if they could go out there and help out, scientists and so forth. There's lots they could do in helping with the COVID crisis and other crises around the world.
Thanks, Sam. No, that's absolutely right. We speak from time to time on Broadcasting Scotland with a range of Scots who are involved in international initiatives to address challenges of all sorts, including the pandemic. So your point about Scotland's participation and the participation of Scots around the world is absolutely right. However, those are the stories behind the news in Scotland at 7 this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work and promotes the station, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, we will be here tomorrow at 7 o'clock with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us then. I would really like to say very many thanks to Sam for joining us this evening and for sharing with us her thoughts and her wisdom and her experience. It's been great to see you again, Sam. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
So that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. Thank you for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland. I hope that you have a very peaceful evening.